ici à la soutenance de Younes, portant sur Inflation Dynamic and Monetary Policy Reaction in Morocco, Structural TVP Approach. Donc vous avez 20 minutes pour présenter votre travail. Après, je céderai la parole à mes collègues pour qu'ils vous formulent leurs remarques et lancer le débat. C'est à vous.
Merci. So I'm very honored to defend today my master's thesis, which is related to monetary policy in Morocco, especially the impact of inflation targeting framework, but also the impact of more flexibility of the exchange rate, which give many issues regarding this problematic. So I will introduce the issue and the problematic with the context of monetary policy in Morocco, before presenting the theoretical background which constitute the basis which give us the empirical modelization before presenting the model and then the result before concluding. So the choice of Morocco is mainly due to the many changes that occurred in the country during the last year. So monetary policy in the country has knew a big change since 2006, where we adopted new status which gives central bank more independence and allocate or set inflation as the main objective of monetary policy. So we can say that monetary policy in Morocco is an implicit inflation targeting, according to the Director of Economic and Research, which stipulated that in an international conference regarding this status. So another issue is related to exchange rate regime, which is turning to be more flexible. So the last step was in 2018, where actually the exchange rate regime, which is an encore based on a basket with US dollar and euro. So the first encore since 2000 and since the adoption of the euro was 80% of euro and 20% of dollar. But preparing the exchange switching, this basket switches into a structure of 16% euro and 40% USD. And in 2018, the bandwidth within which the exchange rate is fluctuating switched from 0.3% to 2.5%. So in this work, we raise two main questions. So the first question is to understand inflation in this context, so because it's very important in terms of inflation targeting and stability, especially the extent of the external threat, basically by the exchange rate pass-through. We will focus on this component. And the second question is related to the mechanism transmission of monetary policy, basically by the trade-off between the inflation objective, which is the main objective of the central bank, but also the exchange rate objective. So we will see which is the trade-off of the central bank and how this evolved during the last years. So the inflation targeting framework is mainly a framework where the central bank conducts forward-looking monetary policy by setting its target and by communication about inflation with public. So it's very important to understand inflation dynamics. What motivates this work actually, according to Svensson, which talk about an inflation forecast targeting as a main issue in this framework, but also has as consequence the focus of monetary policy to the inflation goal in its reaction function. So when we see the monetary policy reaction in an IT framework literature, Aguinaldo and Montier presented an open economy augmented Taylor rule, where actually explain the interest rate of central bank, function of inflation, of output gap, and exchange rate regime as capturing these external shocks. And so for the empirical studies, we have two papers which shows that emerging countries react very much to exchange rate variation and less for inflation targeters. So for inflation targeters, the objective of exchange rate level is more constrained. So for inflation determinant, because it's the first empirical part, we will build our specification regarding the theoretical background. So here, this is not the issue to develop a theoretical model, but just to have an idea about the determinant of inflation based on theory. So the first well-known model is the monetary model of Friedman, which explains mainly inflation by money gap or money growth. So this is the first model. Then we have the long-run markup model, which explains basically inflation in a firm level. So here we have the importance of exchange rate. So it's the model which given the importance of exchange rate, but also wages. Then we have the well-known neo-Keynesian Phillips curve hybrid. So we have two components of the backward inflation and forward inflation, in addition to the variable capturing economic lag. So there is many papers that estimated such model and had many results regarding it. So for example, Donach, for the Turkish case, benchmarked the three models in a forecasting point of view and found that the Phillips curve model has the best performance in this context. Focusing on the exchange rate pass-through, actually we have three families of papers. So beginning by the Taylor hypothesis, because it was the first one that presented actually this fact, stipulating that low inflation is explained mainly by low level for exchange rates pass-through. So Choudhury and Akora have confirmed it and using an open economy macroeconomic model. And then we have many papers which treat exchange rate pass-through as a part of distribution chain, beginning by import prices, then production prices, and then consumption prices. And for the first papers, they found that this exchange rate pass-through is decreasing along the distribution chain. And Peon and Brandis used VAR with exogenous variables and found that for Mexican case, after the adoption of inflation targeting, the exchange rate pass-through is very limited. Finally, there is few papers that treated non-linearity in exchange rate pass-through, but actually it was such limited point of view. So the non-linearities, it was about the extent of the shock. So they stipulated basically that there is non-linearities only if the shock exceeds 25%. So here, non-linearities, we will extend the vision regarding it. So for the model, we use first of all a benchmark model, which is a classic structural block, so with a lower triangle matrix for the structural components, such that we can isolate the exogenous or the variable of our interest as a consequence of all the shocks of the model. Then the main contribution of this paper is the implementation of premature model, which allow a structural VAR model to be time varying. So we have three time variation through parameters, first of all, and through the element of the lower triangle matrix, so that also the interaction between variables is allowed to be time varying. And finally, we allow also the model to be heteroscedastic. So this model will allow us to have an idea about the impact of the changing in policy. So basically, we will see how the transmission mechanism evolves in line with changing policy or changing in external factors, but also gives us a best view on non-linearities than the actual literature. So here we are not seeing in which extent the shock begin to be non-linear, but we will investigate the non-linearities due to changing policy, which is a contribution in this work. So for data, we use macroeconomic hierarchy data from 1998 Q1 to 2018 Q4. So basically 84 observations for each variable. So first of all, we have year-to-year nominal exchange rate appreciation, money growth based on M1 aggregate, then output gap computed using HP future for real GDP, inflation rate, and finally interest rate. So for our two questions, we have two specifications and two empirical models. So the first specification is basically an equation of inflation regarding many determinants. So we have the most exogenous determinants, which is exchange rate, and then money growth and output gap, and we will see how inflation is explained by these components. And secondly, we have basically an open economy Taylor rule as developed by Eggenor and Montiel. So we have interest rate as isolated here and explained by inflation, output gap, and exchange rate. So we will see how the trade-off evolves through time. So here the results for our benchmark model. So we can verify that the responses are in line with the theory. So we see, for instance, that inflation grows if we have a money shock, and that exchange rate or that inflation decrease if we have an appreciation of exchange rates. Also, we can see that the shock is the inflation shock is quickly absorbed, such that after 4 quarters the shock is completely absorbed. So here for forecast error variance decomposition, we can see that inflation is mainly endogenous process. So inflation explains itself. So we can see here the adaptative nature of inflation. For instance, when we see paper related to forecast inflation, we see that the blank models actually Box and Jenkins is very important as a benchmark model, such that they have very important performance. And we can see that exchange rate is very limited when the money gap is such a long run determinant as the theory says. This is a consensus. So here, which is very interesting. So we have the results of the time varying VAR model. So here actually we have the first graphic which compute in each point of time. Actually we have 3 IRF. So basically we have chosen arbitrary 3 points to compute a very classic IRF with the varying parameter, just to have an idea about the changing in the transmission mechanism. And then here for the 3 other graphics we compute an algorithm to choose actually in each point of time we compute an IRF and we take actually the second quarter. So for instance we take this point, which is the lower point, and then we see the evolution through time of this point. We focus on the response of in each point of time for each response. So basically we see that in the short run the impact in absolute value is more important for exchange rate pass-through. So we see that the inflation is increasingly vulnerable to foreign or to external shocks, as well as the sixth quarter. So this is the highest point. So we have the same trend in absolute value. But when we for the last graphic, we compute actually for each iteration the cumulative IRF over 8 quarters, so 2 years, and we see that we had a peak in the exchange rate pass-through, which is basically in line with the global external factors. So we know that since 2011 we have such pressure and geopolitical pressure, which led to an increase in crude oil. So we can see that it's very slightly in line with the external factor changing. So also when the ERP turned and took an upward trend, is also in line with the decreasing in oil prices. So here we analyze the persistence of inflation. So the first result is that the persistence doesn't change over the time with the many changes in policy. So, but to have a bigger picture about it, we zoom actually. So we have four digits of decimals. So there is no big variation, but we can focus and see how it evolves. So we can see that as well as the exchange rate pass-through, the persistence of inflation has increased after 2011 to turn down. Actually, the choice of the second quarter is related to the half-life of the shock. So the shock is halfly absorbed in the second quarter. But we can say that for the three graphics that since 2015 the variables are more stable. So this is in line. Actually, the switching into a new regime began in 2015 with the change in its bracket. So we can say that it's mainly due to the more proactive role of the central bank in terms of managing exchange rate regime. So that we will see through the second specification. So here the most excited part of the work. So here is the estimation of the Taylor rule in 1 lakh actually. So for the first line we have the response of monetary policy based on the interest rate to exchange rate variation. So we can say that during this period the central bank responds less to exchange rates in average, but we can observe that since 2016, which is the date with the beginning of the switching of the regime, the central bank began to be more proactive regarding the exchange rate. So you can see that we have slightly a downward trend. But in 2016, this reversed to regain some points. And which is also interesting is that we found the opposite, which is very symmetric. So we can observe the trade-off that exists in monetary. So when we see the results for output gap, for instance, there is now the same shape. So here, the shape is very clear that there is a trade-off between two variables. So here we can see that central bank became to be more proactive in terms of stabilizing exchange rate level instead of the fact that we are switching into an explicit inflation targeting framework. So as conclusion, we can see first of all that in terms of inflation determines that inflation is mainly endogenous process. So to stabilize inflation, we have to stabilize the inflation itself. So it's a very important fact. But we can say that money contributes in the long run at explaining inflation. The exchange rate pass-through, instead of it's increasing, we can see that its level is under control as much as since 2016 its level is is slightly stabilized. And we conclude also that time variation seems to evolve in line with external factors. So we see that instead of being focused on the internal factors, so which is in the hand of central bank, actually we cannot manage the external factor, but the external factor plays a key role. In terms of limit and extension for this work, actually this kind of model time varying parameters, we are in a Bayesian framework. So to have convergence, we have to use limited variables. So we unfortunately omitted many keywords as current account, for instance, as much as we know that the deficit in the current account occurred in 2012, pushed the authorities to switch into a flexible exchange rate regime. So there is many other points to extend. So the main idea here for next work is to consider a factor augmented model with time variation. So we have the advantage of Primitieri model, and also we have the advantage of Bernanke and Beauvoir model, which consider a model in a rich environment data set, so that central bank have many variables to manage. So thank you for your attention.
Merci pour cette présentation. Vous avez respecté le timing avec 1 minute 09 de secondes de plus. Donc, tout d'abord, avant de céder la parole à mon collègue Younes CHEBIHI, le rapporteur de ce mémoire,